and welcome back to all of you from around the world to the IT Leader Growth Summit. In this session, we are going to discuss the topic popcorn flow. If change is hard, make it continuous. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Claudio Perrone. Claudio is a well-known lean and agile management consultant, an entrepreneur, and a startup strategist based in Dublin in Ireland. He brings models, experiences, and options to top clients around the world, ranging from fast-growing technology startups to Fortune 500 companies. The goal? Move fast, learn faster, and thrive under uncertainty. Claudio is an award-winning keynote speaker, a fellow of the Lean Systems Society, and the creator of the A3 Thinker brainstorming cards and mobile apps for lean problem solving. Claudio is also the inventor of popcorn flow approach to continuous innovation and change. And that is what we are going to talk today about. But enough of this mouthful here. Claudio, I think over to you to directly dive into and tell us a bit more about popcorn flow.
Hey, Matthias and everybody, how are you? So great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So yeah, to describe popcorn flow, I prepared a bunch of slides for you, right? So we'll start maybe just with a few slides and then maybe, I'm sure there will be questions and things like that. So let me share the screen if I can find the setting. Okay, so let's see what popcorn flow is all about, okay? So why am I talking about popcorn flow? Because we have a problem. So inertia, our tendency to do nothing or remain unchanged, inertia is our enemy. You see, life is made of choices, but we don't choose very often, right? We have lots of ideas, great ideas, but despite those and despite our greatest intentions, I guess, we often fall victims of our own inertia and the inertia of others. And we drown one by one. We're pulled down by our daily sleepwalking, by the decisions we don't take, by what's conventional and, safe, by our poor thinking, busyness, bad policies, you name it, oppressive bureaucracy, and so on. And essentially, we are like zombies, we are surrounded by zombies. We live in zombie land. We don't necessarily see it because they look like us, and it's because it's us. And I think it's a human tragedy. And so what happens is that many fragile individuals and organizations continue to operate like business as usual until, of course, one day, usual will likely mean that there's no business. And we do live in turbulent times. And we have technology in society evolve faster than most organizations' ability to adapt. So, we have new knowledge discovery, exponential technologies, new regulations. We have new regulations like, lately as well. More and more sophistication. And the question I have is, how can individuals and organizations learn to move fast, learn faster, and thrive under uncertainty? Matthias, actually, a while ago, you showed me that maturity model of, how organizations are moving towards like digital transformation. How do we go to the later stages of, really high adaptability? It's a problem. No matter how good ideas we have, how many good ideas we have, becomes a big challenge. So the point is we want to improve, but improvement without change is impossible. It's a truth, right? Who says it? Is that Einstein? No, it's somebody like me. It's somebody like you and me. In fact, it's me. I like to quote myself. And so the problem is most of us think about change as big, slow, and scary. But what if instead we looked at it, rather than looking at kind of a Godzilla-like kind of style of change, we looked at the infinitely small and learned to evolve fast, almost as fast as a virus, a microorganism. I learned a while ago that, there are some microorganisms that have a new generation every 15 minutes. They are the most adaptable creatures, I guess, on Earth, right? Can we learn from them? And it seems like a crazy idea. So enter Popcorn Flow. Popcorn Flow is about capturing this kind of pragmatic, anti-fragile philosophy. And so it's based on principles. The first one is, if change is hard, make it continuous, which is the title effectively of the presentation. And really, you could live by this principle. And it seems like a crazy idea, right? We have already, we find hard to change. Why would we do it all the time? But you see, like, as I'm talking to most, to a lot of IT leaders here, particularly if you're involved in IT, you may have come across like the concept of continuous integration, where instead of integrating software at the end of a life cycle, which is hard, you do it all the time, constantly. So rather than, creating bugs pretty much like for months, you create something and then you integrate the modules together, you get the feedback. So that we learned doing this integration continuously works for integrating software. Why don't we do it with change? Why change has to be like one big program, one big initiative? So maybe it's not that stupid, right? Now, there's another principle that says it's not only what you do, but also what you learn by doing it that matters. And I think this is at the core of Agile. If we go beyond the ceremonies and, all the kind of stuff that a lot of people now simply comply to, and I wonder if they actually understand what's behind. Like, Agile is about being humble. Is the understanding that we don't know the perfect process, but we have a way to continuously learn, get feedback, and converge to something that works for us. So this kind of idea of doing and learning go side by side, and I really wanted to bring it to the surface. Another one is everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but the shared opinion is a fact. In other words, if all I have is to convince a team that something should improve, that's what I need to do. It's not about finding all the facts about it. Is to get enough consensus to move one step forward and then get the feedback to actually converge to what is actually reality. And finally, it's not about failure, it's about learning. It's not fail fast, fail often, it's learn fast, learn often. We use a lot this mantra in Lean Startup, fail fast, fail often, but why? Because even if we do something that is safe to fail, then we learn a lot, from the failures, in fact, as much, if not more, than the wins. There would be a lot more to talk about anti-fragility, but maybe we'll get to that later. So that's the philosophy based on principles. And then there's a 7-step decision cycle, which goes this way. It's called problems and observations, options, possible experiments, committed, ongoing, review, next. Now, the beginning of each step makes the word popcorn, hence the name Popcorn Flow. One thing I want to really emphasize is that, once this is the mechanic of the decision cycle, there is a whole philosophy behind, okay? And if all you know and learn is the methods, you will always be slave of the method. If you understand the principles, you will be free to choose whatever you need. So anyways, what we do then is we capture these steps and we bring this kind of learning stream to the surface through a Popcorn Flow board. And so the steps that I just showed before, we typically put them on a board like this. If you're, say, an Agile team and perhaps you're using Scrum or Kanban, you may already have a board, and that board typically captures features and tasks. That's what I would consider the value stream. That is, how do we create value? How do we make money? But this is an additional board, if you want, which is a learning stream. This is what we learn by doing the work, okay? It's not the work, it's what we learn, the experiments that we launch as we observe the work that we're doing. And that allows us convergence and by bringing this to the surface, we actually bring to the surface how teams learn. So we want to make this very practical and pragmatic, right? So let me show you just in 1 minute, effectively. Let's walk a board just to show at the superficial level a canonical way, I guess, to walk this. So we could have a problem on the first column. And the problem can be, if we stay within IT, it could be, I don't know, something like the quality of our code sucks. Of course, it's a very opinionated opinion, but the thing is, like, I may ask my team, I believe that the code sucks. Do you guys agree? And it could be this. It could be we don't know enough about our customers, or there is a gap between the business and their perception of IT. They see us as a cost center, and we're not seen as a platform for creating opportunities. Okay, so there is a gap, a perception gap. So as you see, like here, some may be factual and some may be just perceptions. But the thing is, like here, I'm looking for agreement. Anyways, so in this case, it's the quality of my code sucks. So we come up with options, and typically I would say, let's come up at least with 3. Could be test-driven development, code review, pair programming. It doesn't matter. These are strategies, potential ideas that are coherent with the problem that we have. And then rather than say, I don't know, from now on until death will separate it, will separate us, we shall use pair programming, how about we just explore it with a little experiment? Okay, so rather than having an option and committing to that strategy forever, which can be very dangerous, you could meet resistance or whatever. It could be something as simple as, let's have a little experiment where, maybe Matthias, you and I will pair program. How about we pair program for 3 days? And at the end of the 3 days, our perception is that the quality is better, that we would like to continue to do that more, and so on, okay? And so, so we literally put a review date, and at the end of that, or at the end of a weekly, perhaps, retrospective, so here's committed, we have our review date, then we launched our experiments, and then we review it. And we always ask the same questions. What experiments did we agree to do? Which ones did we actually do? What did we expect to happen? What actually happened? You see there are gaps, right, that we create. And these gaps create our learning, right? The gap between what we anticipate will happen and what actually will happen is an opportunity for learning. And so based on that, what are we going to do next? Now, there's millions of options on how we can go next. We could launch new experiments, persist the experiment, explore the same option with some other experiment. We could explore new options. We could revisit the problem and actually realize that wasn't the problem in the first place, right? But we do that continuously. And I literally work with teams where we generate, 5 experiments a week. And with some teams, actually, the original team I started this in the early days, they had big issues, and we would have like 10 experiments a week. Can you imagine? And so next, and then we create new experiments. And here we leave behind a trail of experiments, really, which is very interesting, actually, to see how other teams see this, and then they want to do the same, and how it moves from software development to marketing to sales to other parts of the organization. And so I use Popcorn Flow like an alien technology, really. If you've seen the movie Total Recall, the first version, not the second one, which was brutal. I look at that as, we're terraforming Mars. You have organizations that have huge potential, which is inexpressed, okay? Because a lot of organizations have pretty much policies and ways of working that are not very conducive to deal with the world that we don't understand. And so instead of oxygen here, we have like popcorn, pretty much. Each experiment is a popcorn. And so, as I said before, imagine a continuous flow of experiments to accelerate the rate of change in every corner of your organization. How far would you go? So my point is, mutants exist and are among us. Okay, there are companies that we all know that you would say they're agile, but they don't call themselves agile. It's not simply because they don't follow necessarily the same good old ceremonies that everybody seems to comply to. It's more like asking a fish, to talk about water. It's around them. That's what they do. And I think the point here is that once you begin with this kind of approach of continuous experimentation, as you change the world around you, it changes you. It changes you. I'm certainly living this right now. And so I once said to a CIO that every single week, even at personal level, I'm 5 experiments older. And when you'll die, how old would you rather be? 2 experiments older or 20,000? So here's my final thoughts, I guess. In time of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. We live indeed in turbulent times, and I think it's awesome because once you understand how to deal with variability and variation and options and asymmetry of those options, where there is a payoff that may be really, really high. So I may fail 10 times, but the 11th time is the one that counts. Then what you do is you don't try to tame the ocean to control the environment. You go to Australia and chase the biggest and most majestic waves. And with this, thank you. Next is now.
Thank you very much, Claudio. That was a great introduction. So let me now delve a bit deeper.
Yeah.
And I would like to, one thing I would like to know, you said earlier on anti-fragile and that is that, but what is this concept a bit more? Because it underlies your framework. So I think let's delve at the beginning just a bit into that and say, what is this anti-fragile?
So that's an interesting one because there's currently 4 principles, right, in Popcorn Flow. And there's one that I'm trying to capture, right? Principles kind of emerge. You can't design them and then leave them. It's more like I leave them first and then some principle emerge. And this one, I'm trying to capture it, but the general idea of anti-fragile is that the opposite of fragile is not robust, because fragile means I get an external shock and I break, okay? Robust means it's like a dam, essentially. If I have an external shock, I'm pretty much the same, right? A dam is pretty much the same. Of course, till a certain point. But anti-fragile is somewhat the opposite. That is, we should have boxes that says essentially shake me. Essentially, the more you shake, the better I become. And there's a lot of examples, if we look in life, that are anti-fragile. So for example, our body, a lot of stuff that is from nature is anti-fragile. So if I do exercise, what happens is that the body effectively every day gets a shock and overcompensates, and you become better, okay? So the observation is that a lot of stuff that humans create is actually fairly fragile. We talk about a lot about agile at scale. We try to reduce randomness. We put a lot of regimented rules pretty much. But it turns out actually that if you're anti-fragile, you actually need a bit of randomness, right? At the same level, if we stop eating dirt, yes, because we have all this, pharmaceutical stuff and whatever, chances are that actually our body is weaker to certain kind of attacks. And so it's this kind of idea and philosophy of actually saying, well, rather than being clever, trying to be clever and predict how things will go, let's be a little bit more humble or even stupid, I would say, but let's experiment a lot more. And it turns out that if you think about options, particularly in optionality, there are some ideas towards thinking that essentially if you have little cost to explore an option, but the potential payoff is really high, then you should do it. Or you may consider doing it. And if in a particular situation you have more upsides than downsides, then you're anti-fragile. If you have more downsides than upsides, then you're fragile. So rather than say predicting an event on when AI will take the world or will take our world, or eat our business. It's more like to say, well, in the event that that happens, I don't know when exactly that will happen, but when it happens, how positioned are we? Are we agile or anti-fragile to that event? Okay, so I didn't come up with that concept. Nasser Taleb is a wonderful writer. He wrote a book, published a book about anti-fragile. We definitely should put it in the links. And it's got a million examples, effectively, of how we can be, or examples of anti-fragility. But the real question is, how can we become more anti-fragile? You know, just saying you should experiment, I don't think is enough. There is something behind that, and some people do that more naturally than others. So what I'm trying to do with Park on Flow is actually to make this a little bit more obvious as a way to operate. You know, so rather than designing a big system on how the entire organization should operate, you know, with big scale frameworks and whatever, that to me is a fragile way. A lot of people working in complexity theory, they don't see that as a good move forward. So what I'm trying to do instead is to create the conditions that are more at DNA level, if you know what I mean. So it's not so much about designing everything. Our body hasn't been designed the way we are. There's been randomness to it and whatever. It's more like can we at the level where certain behaviors emerge. Okay, so that's the idea.
Okay, so you're saying with these experiments, you are getting anti-fragile, but you also have to, what you're letting to talk through is that you have to design these experiments in a certain way, and that is what Popcorn Flow is about, to make you stronger. So you don't want to have experiments like I'm making 10 experiments here, I'm putting them down and I'm slavishly working them from 1 to 10. That is obviously not what you're saying with it.
No, essentially, so if you think about the boards, right, how visual it is, I'm a visual person, hence I made it visual so that I could even remember myself. But the point being is you don't start from the experiment, you start from a problem we agree with. Okay. And so then you come up with options that are hopefully, and I'm saying hopefully because you don't always know, but hopefully they are coherent with addressing the problem. If not completely, hardly the case, at least to move in the right direction. And only then you start committing to experiments. So we commit to experiments so that we can explore options that we hope are addressing a particular problem. Right? In Lean Startup, I learned years ago, not all solutions solve problems, and not all problems are problems worth solving. So we don't start with the solution, we start with the problem, right? So having said that, what I find often, as well with startups I launched, is that we may agree on a problem and widely disagree on options. You know, how do we go about something? And so what we do often is we either start with one, or even better, we launch them in parallel, right? So you could have actually competing options and launch experiments pretty much like to not so much to validate, I don't use that term, because validation means I have a theory and these experiments will undeniably tell me if I was right or wrong, where, you know, I see it more like in complexity. I mean, I see the world like the ocean. It's always in continuous change. So I don't play the card of the scientific method because we don't have all the variables. We are not isolated. We don't have enough information. And particularly, you know, on small and medium business level, how much data can you really gather? So let's be clear here. What I'm talking about is perceptions and opinions as first-class citizens. Be prepared to be wrong. Be prepared to fall a lot of times. Be prepared to explore different avenues. And once you get that kind of approach, I guess, to life, you begin to have a lot less certainties. You know, a lot less rely a lot less on real facts. You know, I call facts occasionally useful fiction, you know, because very often, you know, even when we talk about big data, you know, there's a lot of cases where it's clear that even the data set is biased, and but we become so arrogant and we don't, you know, we have these filters and we can't see beyond that. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not biased. In fact, I'm saying I am biased. Hence, I'm doing a lot of exploration.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's one thing that's very important. And what you also said in there is this fear of failure that everybody has, and especially in businesses, we are often seen to not being able to fail, or it's bad to fail. How do you work against that? That's, I mean, obviously a lot of the experiments will go against it, or by doing lots of experiments, you are starting to fail less, or in the end, in the bigger picture, you're failing less. But
No, you don't.
How does that apply?
No, you don't. That's the point, actually. It's quite funny because sometimes I explain, you know, that 40% of my own experiments fail to meet my own expectations. I learn from everyone. Now, the key here is that to make them, as much as you can, safe to fail. See, the problem is we don't want to fail experiments, or we don't want to fail when it's not safe to do so. So very often what I do is, if I have something that is, you know, that leads maybe to some event or some things that I know I can't fail, then I would probably launch a lot of preparation experiments where it is safe to fail that lead to that, okay? So the point being is, learning to fail is actually an acquired skill, okay? In a way, one thing I say is, like, the real failure is when we fail to learn. We fail to create opportunities for us to learn, okay? Remember, one of the principles says, is not only what you do, but also what you learn by doing it that matters. So when we fail to learn, that's the real failure. But the gap between an expectation is reality and reality, that's the learning. That's actually the learning, is when we don't meet our expectations, or what I would call anticipations, that we start thinking, Matthias, we did pair programming, it didn't work out for us. Why is that? You know, what can we do maybe to change this? Or maybe we should try different alternatives. What are the conditions that led to that? And so that kind of attitude is important. If I don't fail enough, it probably means that I'm not daring. I'm not daring enough. So it's all easy, like, to play safe, but actually, I worked recently with a sales team, and they were constantly, systematically meeting all their targets. I mean, all our experiments were doing really well, but the only one who was worried was me, because I would say, well, guys, maybe we should try something a little bit more daring. Okay. And so that is an important attitude, an important skill to learn. Failure is an option. Is not failing not an option?
Okay. But it is, as you say, it's a learned skill. And then it's also a learned skill, and that is, I would like to on your popcorn flow, really look at it. So you look at the problem, you have the options, you launch the experiments, and then you get an output.
Yes.
You bring that back to the options. Do you go to the next option? Then
yeah.
Is it that option? How do you bring that back?
So it's on the next, right? So we run the experiment, and then we review. On the review, effectively, we ask those questions. What was the expectation? What was the reality? What is the reality? Based on this gap, what did we learn? Based on that, what are we going to do next? Now, on the next phase, there you have options, okay? So you can just archive it, right? And typically, I make them very visible. There are teams I worked with. They have hundreds of experiments at this point, right? And you can go to any experiment and actually say, why did we do that? Okay, that's why. Okay. But having said that, it's a cycle, right? So the next part, you may actually consider, do we know enough? Yes. Okay, let's finish it. Or do we need to explore a new option? Or do we need to explore the same option? Do we need to persist the experiment, new experiments, revisit the problem? Is it still a problem worth solving? See, the thing about the failure and the learning, maybe a good metaphor is this one. You can't learn how to surf if you're not prepared to get wet. You can't learn to skateboard if you're not prepared to fall. I've been doing a little bit of skateboarding. You know, one thing I learned is that your peers like cheer you if you try. They laugh with you, at you when you fall and whatever. But the only ones who never fall are the ones who are sitting on the bench looking at their life passing by. That's it, right? You don't want to fail, that's it. You're not living your life, not to your potential at least, right? It's the same, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine. He was going through a 10 weeks workshop in boxing, and he would say, yes, Claudio, you can't learn boxing if you're not prepared to take a punch. You know, there's a lot of examples, I guess, where we begin and learn to observe that actually we accept that as a given, but for some reason we don't do that in business. And that makes us fragile because everything else is on the move, right? And you may try to conform, or you can actually go to the next level and explore a lot more on what's around you.
Okay, yeah, I like that. That this coming back to the anti-fragile, and then, but if you're saying with the next, so you can either come back to say, okay, let's do a small going back to just another experiment, or even the same experiment differently, or even again, you might go back, okay, let's look at the next option, or you might go back and say, okay, our problem is solved, or it's not solvable, and we use another problem. But
yeah, I mean, you can go deeper and deeper, right? The point being about complexity as well is you're not trying to necessarily solve the problem as in systematic lean problem solving. You know, it was in my bio. I did a lot of work on lean problem solving. I even sold tools to Toyota, right? I know what that part is. But the thing is, like, we're here in a world of complexity where you need to more kind of explore. And in this case, the system is not just the process, it's actually us, it's the world that surrounds us. And so what we're doing by introducing problems, we're actually probing the system, okay? We're nudging it, and the forces around are changing around us. So very often these problems disappear because the forces at work change. And so I've seen this in so many different contexts look, Power Flow is used, you know, for agile teams doing retrospectives, for people at personal level, for people, asking for a rise, whatever, for self-driving cars. You know, there's an Italian, well, actually I can't talk about that. Let's say there's a famous sports company that use that for things that are probably not that common, but anyways, in innovation. And so in different ways, effectively, to explore the world around you and to change the nature of the problem, because it's not all about cause and effect, or better, the causes of certain problems can only be seen in hindsight when you are in domains that are complex domains. So if we're talking about a mechanical problem or a technical problem, you could say, well, part of this is complicated, so I can find the root cause, I'll do root cause analysis and find particular things. But then there's part of that problem that actually involves people, right? Even if we stay within the technical domain, I guess, there are aspects that are outside the technical and they're way more complex. And then there are a number of other problems where effectively you're not in control of the environment. You don't have all the variables. You will never have all the variables, right? And sometimes even knowing the cause of the problem is of no help whatsoever to address actually how to move forward, And that's because there's a lot of randomness and variability and whatever. And so that's the problem. That's the challenge, is to have that kind of adaptability to not trying to control necessarily the environment, is to actually absorb it, right? To take advantage of that and take advantage of the opportunities that emerge.
Great, thanks. I think one other aspect you touched on already implicitly, or you said it explicitly, but we didn't make it that explicit, is using your popcorn flow in business versus using it personally.
Yeah.
How does one differentiate? Does one differentiate? Is it just the
Yeah.
same?
So when I initially created Popcorn Flow by actually with distributed teams, right, across different continents. So it was totally like a business-like setup. And but one thing I kind of realized was that all the time, like Popcorn Flow used to be applied like in different contexts. And one thing I realized in the end was at the core, it has nothing to do with technical or business, is about decision making. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, life is made of decisions. So every time we need to take decisions, you may consider Popcorn Flow, not necessarily with the board, but you may begin to consider Popcorn Flow as a way to structure essentially a conversation. So from the business point of view, I find it, for example, I talk to IT leaders to actually say, rather than tell people what to do, share maybe a board with your reports, right? And you begin to discuss, I see the problem in this way, do you agree? Or if you have a boss, it may be the opposite, which is like you go to your boss, you say, I see the problem in this way, do you agree? So what you're trying is to find agreement first, and then you come up with options. It's a completely different way of structuring certain conversations, which is natural for a lot of people. People may say, oh, I've seen something like this, we use this kind of approach already. Absolutely. I've seen, the president of the former president, at least, of the United States, using this kind of approach, right? Options and experiments, maybe not using exactly the same language, but that was it. And then I've seen people using it at business level. Again, an agile team, I mentioned that, like a lot of agile teams use it for retrospectives. If you're using things like Scrum or other approaches in general, there is this kind of idea of reflecting on how you're doing the work week after week. And so they use Popcorn Flow because essentially at the beginning and end, you're reviewing experiments and launching new experiments, and it's very visible. There's no meeting that go wasted effectively. There's always something. But then you have like boards, like company boards, strategic boards that actually use Popcorn Flow, because the point here is, rather than say we pursue this very expensive strategy and commit to that strategy, they keep their options open and they commit to experiments instead. So it's a deliberate way to actually to approach, opportunities effectively at that level, because you're co-designing a lot of these options. And then at personal level, I don't know, I use it with my son. There are families who are using it, right? We have lots of little problems. One day he was bored, and we'll say, why are you bored? Oh, because I'm in Minecraft, I don't know what to build. And we come up with options of what to build, and then suddenly like he launched himself in a number of things. But there's a family I know, they used it with their hamster. But apparently was bored, had a boring life, and so they created a seesaw for the hamster to improve the life of their hamster. At the same time, though, one of the daughters had problems at school, and they actually co-designed options with the parents on how to move forward, essentially. So she literally co-designed a program to move forward. Okay, so this is the kind of impact that I'm looking at. Particularly, I'm also building a digital platform, and I'm looking for something that is a little bit more, let's say, at planetary level. I don't know if you're familiar with the Global Development Goals, but my hypothesis, I guess, is what if I could enable friendly strangers to address problems like extreme poverty or education and whatever. I have a past where some social activists, also in South Africa, adopted some of my tools, to fight things like racism and so on. And that had a profound impact in what I'm trying to do. So I consider myself, in a way, an activist by invention. Yeah. So, it's for what I create, I guess, that hopefully I will be able, through people like even people who are listening today, to make a difference, to make an impact.
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. Just another aspect again. Whilst you're talking, I'm always getting new aspects of this, because you said people who are listening. A lot of them are IT managers and who are extremely busy running the business and running their teams and running this. How do they get time to do experiments?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, right? Because it's funny, right? Because I go to certain companies and they say, our managers say, our leaders say, we need to innovate and we don't know how. We don't know how. Then I introduce Popcorn Flow, and the next reaction is, now we know how, because it's all about innovation, right? You can use it for operational excellence and all, so internal innovation, but you can actually use it as well for, understanding what the customer's needs are, generating options and finding, optional features that you can build to better to better address those customer needs, particularly in areas that are poorly served by the market. So this is used from product development or whatever. But the next question they ask is, well, where do we find the time? So we know how, but we don't have the time, or how do we find it? And to me, it's very simple. In terms of operational excellence, for teams who are agile or they claim to be agile, they're already spending that time doing retrospectives, for example. It's just that those retrospectives very often are not effective, and so they don't spend time, they just wasted on those retrospectives. So what I'm sharing here is actually something that does work, I claim, but you can just experiment with that, of course, right? And now they're asking the question, oh, but these experiments take time. Well, first of all, let's make those experiments small, okay? My experiments sometimes are just a meeting, okay, where I have an expectation on the outcome of the meeting, or they would take 3 days overall to know the results, or a week. Maximum, generally for me at least, 2 weeks, but it depends on the domain, of course. But you get to a point where you begin to learn how to make smaller experiments. This is not necessarily to save time, it's to try to anticipate how fast I can get feedback, right? Because experiments are all about learning, right? If my longest experiment was 9 months. I was waiting for an event. I totally regretted it. It was on my board. It was looking at me all the time and say, how can I split it? So not anymore. So first of all, you make them small, but once you learn to make them small, well, you begin to make many. And it turns out that if you run experiments that remove impediments, what happens to your work? Well, you just removed a lot of impediments. You go faster, right? Because you don't have all the impediments that very often are not your own work, is waiting for something else to happen, some dependency, some missed opportunity. There's a lot of stuff like that. So first of all, if you run experiments that work systematically on removing impediments, you're going faster, your throughput goes high. In fact, in my own experience is that, I actually have a burn-up chart. I look at burn-up chart. On one side is the throughput of my work, and the other one is the throughput of my learning, that is my experiments. And it turns out, you could probably do a diagram like that, where it goes up. There's a correlation. I can't say it's causation. I can't claim it because, cause effects may depend on a number of variables. But in my experience, as the burn-up chart of the learning experiments goes up, so does the value stream. Learning stream and value stream go together. They're like rails on a ladder. You want to make progress, you need both, right? Otherwise, we're focusing on the doing, but that's the busyness. And we really forget how to be effective. In software development, the goal is not to produce. Okay, we think it's produce, and very often we talk to people who talk about throughput and delivering whatever. It's about solving problems. It's about solving customer needs. Okay, so it's about actually reflecting on what the needs are and come up with options eventually to come up with something that is better. So it's not like in manufacturing where we produce widgets, at the same level. We always need to think about better ways to solve certain problems. So, maybe it's an old tried thing, but there is a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And to be overly optimized for efficiency is a sure way to become fragile. Yeah. The more you automate the existing system, the less you're adaptable to the new ones, right? Unless you have maybe a platform, I guess, to adapt to that. So you need to be careful on our general need, again, to eliminate variation and create everything, perfect. I'm not saying I'm against automation. Everything I'm doing is automated, right? But what I'm saying is, let's be careful. It's not just produce.
Right. So you're saying that it is if you've got a problem wherever, you can apply this model, and you are often solving the problem faster because you are looking at the options. You're already eliminating them at that point. You're running the experiments that are most probably going to look at those.
Okay, to qualify it, optionality, hence Popcorn Flow, has got more value when the complexity raises. The more uncertainty you have, the more value you get. Otherwise, it's waste, okay? So I don't know if you're familiar with Kinavi, and I don't really want to get into that, but essentially there is a difference between obvious and complicated, and complex or chaotic. And with the complicated, you would use things like analysis, automation. This is where, expertise is important because it depends on context and whatever. But as you move towards the complex world, and, companies, organizations tend to be complex adaptive systems, which is a big brush, to be honest. But let's say there's a lot of problems that are more in the complex part. And in that sense, it's more about exploration. So the more you need to explore, take decisions and whatever, the more perhaps you would consider something like Popcorn Flow. The less you have that, so if you live in a world that never changes and you're simply improving the way you're working and that's it, then there are probably good practices. There are definitely actually good practices at work. And in that sense, you would use strategies like analysis. Now, Popcorn Flow does not preclude that you wouldn't use analysis, but generally wise, it's more about probing and experimentation. So the more complex we tend to be, the less variables, I guess, we have, the more you would go in the Popcorn Flow kind of direction of trying something to see what works and be less clever and more tentative. There's no silver bullet. That's one thing I learned.
That absolutely explains it to me. That gives me a good idea. I think for me, you've answered about my questions. Is there anything that I've left out that now, whilst we were talking, you said, okay, that we definitely need to still look at, or have we covered it about?
No, there would be so much more, right? As you know, if you go deep into complexity, you would see, for example, there are things like, how do you terraform organizations? How do you move from one team to many teams? But in the end, and how do you? So I do things like trading options and among teams and whatever. So it's more like creating the conditions to have teams to interact with each other, like in a network and whatever. But I'm very careful on not trying to design upfront how an organization should really behave. There are things and practices that are emerging as we speak. Popcorn Flow is evolving in itself. And so, it's good to understand a bit of the canonical way, I guess, to approach this kind of issues. And then we practice, certain things like emerge. So, yeah, it's more about, to be honest, it's more about trying. It's not even about, if you have a sense that something like that might work, it really only takes one person to be good at it. You don't have to splash Popcorn Flow in your organization and say, from now on, that's the way we do it. It's more like, it starts with yourself. You can be good, I can help, of course, right? But the point being is that it starts with one person. You have to be good at facilitating that kind of conversation. And then people get to experience it. At least in my experience, this is what I've seen effectively, right? Where you could even start like stealth effectively and introduce something like this, and then get good at it effectively. And like popcorn, you know, you start at the beginning, you put the kernels on the pan. At the beginning, the first experiments are bloody hard, and then pam pam pam, they start and become much more usable. You know, that's, I guess, all I can say. You know, what opportunities do we have here? I mean, the first company I actually worked with, the CIO said that the revenue grew by a factor 10 in 1 year, thanks to Popcorn Flow. That's the kind of opportunities we're looking at. Is that, you know, a result that we can claim for everything? Absolutely not. I worked with, you know, very large organizations. Takes a lot longer, I guess, to get there, where we have islands of, you know, mutants pretty much. You know, that's the way I look at it, right? We are in Zombieland and we have mutants against zombies, and I'm creating a new generation of mutants here. X-Men, where the X is experimentation. Wonderful X-Men and women, you know, they go there and they have this kind of approach to try things a lot more often that would otherwise try, and it puts you in a much more anti-fragile position.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we need to slowly wrap up, but I am always asking one question to my speakers, and that is, if there was only one thing that your audience takes out of this talk, what would you think you would want them to remember?
It's in the title. If change is hard, make it continuous. It's really like, sometimes I feel that's the only thing I should say. Try continuous change, not continuous improvements. Now, continuous improvement had this kind of idea that we need to reach perfection or whatever. It's just continuous change. This idea, which is much closer to evolution in many ways, where there is some aspect of randomness. It essentially being more opportunistic, right? The stuff coming at your life, take an opportunity, try something. It doesn't have to be all the time reaching for perfection, but it's about constantly challenging the status quo. I actually challenge stuff that works for me very often, because how do I know that I didn't reach like local optima, right? So it really is like, try continuous change. You find change is hard, make it continuous. The only thing is, like, through Popcorn Flow, I realized that telling people, you know, they should change continuously, or they should be, I don't know, in Agile we say, be a servant leader. You know, it means nothing. It really means nothing, right? It's a principle that may have value in itself or some, but, as Deming said, like in Lean, purpose without method is nonsense, effectively. And so I think it's not so much about, using a framework. It's more like understanding principles and then eventually choosing frameworks or choosing approaches, I guess, as they're closer to what we think actually would be better. I just don't want to just survive uncertainty. I want to thrive on uncertainty. I want to look for options. I want to look for ways to do that. And, so far I hadn't found anything really that worked for me in that direction, because, I started Agile in 2001, at the time of the Agile Manifesto. You actually go to the Agile Manifesto on the Italian version, you will find at the bottom there's my name as one of the translators. I've been in Agile for a long time. And before that, I used to be, chief architect when it was cool to be an architect, all that kind of stuff. But one thing about Agile was that we moved from an element of experimentation to the phase where we are now, where there's a lot of exploitation for a number of reasons, right? There are frameworks and all that kind of stuff. And so to me, this is more like, let's go back to the intent that we had back then, which was more like find better ways and work with others to learn together how to find better ways to develop products, to build software, to create great organizations. So that's my answer to that. And it definitely is not the only answer. but it's something that perhaps you may consider exploring in the future.
Great, thanks. I think that covers it about. And I mean, you also always say if somebody really has an answer, they will find you on your website under the Agile Sensei, and they can get in contact with you if there's really anything. So by all means, to our viewers, do that if you really want to. And then also another one to our viewers again, remember that if you subscribe to the All Access Pass at the moment, many of you will be looking at on the free version, then you will get access to normally the slide decks, you will get access to these recordings to re-watch them as well, to get the audio version of it, and to also get a lot of other additional benefits. So I would strongly recommend it, but if you just want to look at watch it for free as you do, by all means, this is why we are doing it, because we are really passionate to bring this to you. The last thing that then is left for me is to again say thank you very much, Claudio. That was very interesting, and I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. And I think that concludes our session. So it is a very good morning, a very good day, or a very good night to those people all around the globe that are watching.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.